Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Fresh Expressions event, our relaunch of GodSend. Thank you for joining us. If you're on Facebook, sorry if there was a delay in us starting. The joy of whenever you try and do a technical event, it always fails somewhere, but there we go. We got there in the end. So just to cover what we're doing this evening, in a little while, we will be chatting with some of our contributors. So I'll introduce those guys to you in a little bit. But if you have any questions for them, if we get questions, there'll be an opportunity to put those questions to the guys who we'll be seeing in a little while. And later on, we'll be talking about where you can buy the book and where you can access the new website. Of course, some of you will already be doing this through the website, which is great as well. But for now, I'm just going to give you a little teaser trailer of what the new GodSend content is all about.
Mike, what are these new Christian communities?
So, which bit did you like?
We kept it short and sweet, within 45 minutes maximum.
And then we'll pray for each other and pray in clusters. And we'll just see what God does in that time together.
But love is also much more than that. Often, love has to be organised.
On a Wednesday morning, we would have a holiday club, and we still do every Wednesday morning.
It's really important for Christian communities to allow space for people to practice what they figured out.
I'll be texting everybody that I know to tell them, oh, you can go to these places for free.
That's quite an unusual thing for you to say.
Maybe, yeah, especially
it hasn't gone very far, but it's been introduced.
Lived her life as if she was a Christian. She never told them to live their life like that.
There are great gifts that each expression of church can offer.
What would discipleship be like for steampunks?
And then she led the circle. Suddenly, these blokes started to talk to me.
Why bother? Because it helps you grow as a Christian.
So there we have it. I hope that gives you a nice little flavor as to what's to come. So there's some familiar content for those who've engaged with GodSend before, and some new content for those who have seen it as well. So right now, I'm going to introduce our panel, I guess. So first off, we have the wonderful Reverend Dr. Michael Moyna, as we affectionately call him, just Mike. We also have Simon Goddard, who heads up resourcing for Fresh Expressions. And we have Nidrat Hopper, who is one of the contributors to GodSend. Realize I forgot to say, Mike is the author of GodSend, if you haven't put that two together. Hi, guys. How are we doing?
Good evening.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us. So we've got some questions to start us off. I'm going to go to you, Simon, first, if that's okay. Could you tell us, for those who don't know, what is GodSend in brief? What is it we're launching today? What's new?
Okay, well, GodSend's been around for a couple of years, so we're relaunching this evening. And GodSend is a resource that helps people to start, or if they've already started, to develop new Christian communities. And this evening, we're relaunching this. There's been a second edition of the book that's been created, and that's got some new chapters, and those are represented on a new website, new units on a website, godsend.cloud. So a new look to the web resource and a new edition of the book. That's basically briefly what we're relaunching this evening, Mark.
Excellent. Mike, could you tell us in brief, I realize this is a big question to give us in brief, but how did GodSend come about? Where did the idea of the book come from? When did it first start? What was the inspiration?
Well, in Fresh Expressions, we've been involved with new Christian communities for almost 20 years now. And over that time, we've met, people in the team have met with all sorts of very exciting pioneers, people doing all sorts of interesting things on the ground. And we've just been listening to them. And in a way, having my name as the author at the bottom of the book is a little bit unfair, because all I've done is to nick and borrow some ideas that various practitioners have come up with over the years. And we just wanted to make those ideas available to the wider community. Many people, when they start these new Christian communities, they think they can do it intuitively. And actually, quite a few people do it brilliantly in an intuitive way. But why not learn from everyone else's intuition? Why not just borrow great ideas from other people? And so that was the point of the GodSend book. It contains stories, it contains frameworks, it contains insights and ideas to help teams that are starting new Christian communities, fresh expressions of church, whatever you want to call them, to help them pray through what God might be calling them to do next. And so that's what the point of this, not telling anyone what to do, but giving ideas and inspiration so that people can pray through what might God be saying to us that we can do next or do better.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mike. Nudrat.
Hi.
I realize you're probably been the one who's been thrown in the deep end in the most recent fashion. As someone who has recorded all these conversations for each chapter of the book, I'd really love to hear what your sort of first impressions of GodSend are, because you really went for a deep dive straight away. So what have your first impressions of the resource been?
I came across Mike almost accidentally, to be very honest. And that was a happy accident because it led me to read GodSend. My first impressions were that its earthiness. It's so attractive in its earthiness, its reality. It acknowledges life as it is lived now in 2023. And it recognizes not just the challenges, but also the blessings that we have living in this part of the world. And one of the realities of living life now, here, is that there are people who find themselves separated, isolated, having no space. So I found that the second thing that was really, really attractive about GodSend is that there is a space for everyone. That's Brilliant. It, really. That was what attracted me first, and I was in it straight away.
Amazing. It is great. It's like the more you uncover stuff, I've been finding it's just all these like constant little gems of wisdom at every single turn. It's fantastic. Let me throw a question out to all of you, which is we know now GodSend has been around for a while. And so what's the sort of legacy that GodSend has left behind? What's the I guess the fruit maybe of what we've seen? I
mean, Mark, if I give you 2 or 3 examples, I'm thinking of Frances. She's in Wigan. I think she's in touch with something like 20 teams or more, starting and leading these new Christian communities. She's drawing them together into gatherings, perhaps 2 or 3 gatherings each term. And in the next gathering, when these teams meet together, she's taken one of the chapters from the GodSend book, and it's a chapter about how you can use the Bible when you're introducing the gospel to people who've got no Christian background. If someone's never looked at the Bible before, how can they look at stories about Jesus in a way that really engages them? And in the GodSend book, in this chapter, we've got 4 different ideas for how they can do that. And so what Frances is going to do is she's going to get the teams, invite them to sit at 4 different tables. And during the gathering, each table will try one of those ideas, and then they'll talk together and say how they got on. So she's using this to work with teams and help them explore ways that they can do evangelism, if you like. How can they share Jesus in today's world? She sent me an email this morning saying that she'd just been to a church or group of churches in the neighbouring deanery. She's Church of England, that's Church of England language. And she said she'd shared with them some of the GodSend material, and they were over the moon with the possibilities for how they could use it. Very different example. I work for the Church of England, the Diocese of Oxford. We have 2 ministers who are using the GodSend material for a Lent course. And they're running a Lent course with members of their congregations, not people who are already starting new Christian communities, but people who they hope might one day think this is a good thing to do. And so they're running this Lent course, and they're using some of the early chapters of GodSend as a basis for that Lent course for members of their congregation. If I give you a third quick example, I'm working with a coalition of Roman Catholic dioceses and Protestant churches in Switzerland. And they started a little institute in the German part of Switzerland, in Lucerne. And this institute is going to train full and part-time Christian workers in how to start Fresh Expression Church. And they've translated the GodSend book into German, and the whole basis of their curriculum will be GodSend. They're going to build that whole curriculum around GodSend, using that as the basic material for how they're going to train people to start these Fresh Expressions of Church. So there you are, 3 very different examples.
That's awesome. I think that leads us nicely into the obvious question about what are the hopes and dreams for GodSend. You know, we've touched on it a little bit, but I think what's the potential?
Well, let me start in a small way, and then Simon might want to build on this. When we came to do this revision of GodSend, and basically what we found was that there were all sorts of insights that we hadn't got into the first edition, because we're learning all the time and people coming up with new stuff all the time. So when it came to doing this revision, I sat down with a focus group of pioneers, and they hadn't actually come across GodSend before. So we all had to send them the first edition of the book, and they all read it. And the first thing they said to me was, Mike, I wish we had seen this before. It is so useful. And if only we read it 2 or 3 years ago. So my first hope for GodSend is that everyone who is working to start these new Christian communities, that they'll read some of these chapters, because they will be amazed, I think, just as I've been amazed. You know, I've had the easy job. I've just got together some great ideas, written them down. But, you know, I think they will be really surprised and really helped at some of the practical wisdom that's in that book. So I hope that they'll use this book as an opportunity, and the resources on the website, to borrow great ideas from other people. Just imagine you're in the room, you're talking to other people who are pioneering. You might say, well, what do you do? And what have you learned? Well, they can pick up those ideas in the book, and that's what I hope they'll do.
I'll follow that with Mike, what Mike just shared, because I think I did a group using the GodSend materials with a group of Methodist churches in the West Midlands. And one of those, the churches that was involved with that, they had started a messy church, and they were already a couple of years in. But when they accessed the GodSend material, they realized a couple of the circles, and we use the missional journey or the Fresh Expressions journey as a basis for this. And as the first circle is listening, and they realize that they perhaps jumped a couple of the circles or gone very briefly through the first couple of circles. And what they did was go back and invest in the listening. Even though they'd started, even though they already had a group of people they were connected with, they went and redid the listening, and that enhanced and enriched what they were doing in their Fresh Expression. So I think my hope is that there will be some groups in churches who've already started on this journey and will find ways of enriching and developing what they've started. I also have this hope that there are people that have embraced GodSend and are using GodSend that are not necessarily at the heart of church and at the edge of church, and that's great. It's great to see pioneers popping up all over the place. But I guess I have a hope that there will be churches that will see this as a way. Often we in churches we talk about adding numbers to churches, to perhaps a couple of extra people in on a Sunday morning. My hope is that churches will embrace this as a way of multiplying what they're doing, seeing that if they start these new Christian communities, they, as Nudrat was saying, there's a space for everyone. Not everyone's going to come to one expression of church. So if we start a variety of expressions of church, there'll be a space for everyone, and they can multiply what they're doing by embracing the principles in GodSend. So there's a couple of my hopes for GodSend.
Yeah, that's really excellent. I always get excited at just the real grassroots effects and lives changed. Anything that involves lives changed and easy access for people getting to know Jesus is a win in my book.
Mark, this is going to be one of the books we've got to. My hope is that people have this book as one of the ones they reach out for when they're thinking about doing church. It's got to be one of those because it will bring them some new perspectives of looking at what church is in this time, in this age.
Brilliant. What are your favorite things about this resource? This is quite kind of a not too serious a question. So for example, I think my favorite thing is the conversations between Mike and Nudrat, because I think it's quite unique. You think about everyone's seeing different resources out there that help with different things, but I've never seen something like this where you've got some like really good in-depth content that's theologically sound and all sorts of good stuff, but then having the opportunity to just see two people really just unpack it. And it leaves me wanting more. I'm sort of going, oh, you've only just scratched the surface of that, which I think is brilliant. What about you guys?
So I love the animations, the cartoons, actually. I love the drawing, I love the color. I think that some of these cartoons, actually, I was looking at one or two of them recently, and I thought, actually, they pack an awful lot into a minute and a half. So I think the cartoons are great, and I think the stories are brilliant. And I hope we've still got the story which Tim Lee tells about how he uses Bible talk in a fresh expression that he was leading, because there's a lovely smile at the end of that little video, which I think is gorgeous. He'll feel very embarrassed to hear me say that.
Can I go next? The simplicity of the material, it's accessible, and I loved the chance to talk to Mike in depth about things, to really tease out some of those things that he's written about in the book. So I've really enjoyed the simplicity of the material.
Yeah, I was going to say the animations, which I think are great, and just a shout out to Ant Clifford from Creative Stream up in Sheffield, who have put those animations together for us. They are great. But I think if Mike's taken that one, what I will say is I love the way that the book and the web resource, the website that we've created, I would say they both operate independently. So you can go onto the website, you can watch the animation, you can look at the conversation, you can hear the stories, and you'll be a really good way down understanding and beginning in that particular unit and what have you. But there's also the book to go alongside it. Got a copy here. And so we learn in different ways, don't we? And there will be those that love to have something in their hand, love to be able to read and think and have that, but there will be others who just visually will be engaging with that. So I love the way that it's there for all sorts of people in all sorts of different ways of learning. So yeah,
brilliant, lots to love. I'm going to ask a question. So those who know me from the Fresh Expressions podcast will know I always ask this question, well, we're 3 episodes into the podcast. I have been asking this question, and I promise I do ask it in the other episodes. But I ask, what's the one thing you would say, what's the one encouragement you would give to people who might be thinking about starting a new Christian community, might be umming and ahhing about it, and might be considering GodSend as something to engage with? What's that one thing you say to those people?
Be courageous. Just be courageous. There are times when you may be sitting there quietly in a reflective mood and you're thinking about whether you should do it or not. I would just encourage you to do it. Be courageous. If there's even a ripple of excitement inside, that take it as an encouragement that yes, you should do it. Go for it.
And I'd build on what Nudrat said. I totally agree with her. I would say, what are you passionate about? What do you really enjoy doing? Find a friend and see if you can share that with other people. I mean, if you're really passionate about watching films, then why don't you just have a great time by inviting friends? Maybe your kids are at school and you find fellow parents and you say, come, we'll have a video evening on Friday, and then the following week we'll meet together and have a meal and discuss the film that we watched. So why don't you just share your passion with other people? This is really easy to do. And a lot of people get quite sort of, all wrought up inside and think, oh gosh, it's going to be so difficult to start these new communities. And they forget that they're actually only one little step away. If you, for example, are coaching some teenagers in a sport, then why don't you team up with 1 or 2 others and have a meal at the end? The other people help bring the food, and then you all eat together and build community that way. This is just one step on from what you're already doing. So it's to enhance what is a passion in your life. So I want to say with Nudrat, be courageous, but remember, you've got all the foundations there. What do you enjoy doing? Find a way to share it with other people. And whoa, you may be amazed at how your passion becomes even more exciting.
And my response to that question about sort of main encouragement people starting out is to start by doing something. I think often in churches we have this expectation that we're going to get the whole plan downloaded by God. So we've got A all the way through to Z and we know exactly how it's going to end. And I think it's really important to find a friend and to do this as team, as community. But I would say once you've got someone that you've started listening with, take step 1. Even if you don't have any idea what step 2 is going to be, take step 1, take the first step and experiment. I was involved in a Fresh Expression that began thinking that they were going to reach young people in the nighttime economy. And what happened was that they ended up meeting and serving a group of people and a community growing amongst those who were experiencing homelessness and addiction issues. And that was completely unexpected, but it was what God showed them after they began the journey. And so I'd just say start. Don't worry about what the second step's going to be. Just take the first step and then go from there.
I always hear the comment from the movement is keep it simple and just do it. So those 2 simple things, just keep it simple and just do it. I think a combination of those 2 has already been said. Simon, I'm going to come to you for our next question. Before I do, just a reminder about if you're watching and you have any burning questions, do post them in the comments. We've got 1 question so far, so if there are any more, it would be great to hear from you. But Simon, we've done all this work preparing, updating the resource, adding new content. Is it stopping there, or do we have plans for the future, and what might they be?
That sounds like a leading question to me.
Not at all.
Yeah, we've got plans for the future. I think I sort of hinted at this in what my hopes were for the future, because I do see GodSend as a resource that churches will be able to use, and groups of churches. So currently in a couple of denominations, there are these what we call them, well, in the Anglican Church they're called greenhouses, in other denominations they're called different things, but basically they're learning communities of different teams that are coming together to journey through the GodSend material. So perhaps once a term or twice a year, coming together, planning what they might do over the next 6 months, but using the GodSend material to do that. And our hopes are is that we will build a community of these people who are enabling these hubs of teams coming together. And that might be just a local church minister who says, I want to release 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 teams within my church to be able to start these new congregations. And so we would journey with those people who are enabling that. It might be people across a circuit or a deanery or a cluster or whatever language the church grouping that you're part of uses, but a group of people starting Fresh Expressions, coming together to learn from one another, to journey through GodSend together, be inspired and encouraged. So on the website, we're making resources available, and we'll be keeping in touch with people who sign up with us to talk more about these hub enablers and how we might support not just those who are starting Fresh Expressions, but those who are seeking to gather those people together in learning communities. We're also planning to use the resource, perhaps working through each of the units, having workshops with Mike and perhaps others to sort of dig deep. So if there are people who are accessing the resource and think, oh, it'd be good to think a bit more about this particular part of the journey, then we'll be having some workshops coming up as well. So that's just a taster of what we hope this will grow into over the next few months.
And I know as well we've talked briefly about in our own meetings as in Fresh Expressions about the different materials that will be relevant to GodSend. So from blog posts and stories and all sorts of different things that we'll be aiming to funnel through to the GodSend website as well. A really good excuse to sign up to our newsletter. Cheeky.
And it's just worth saying that we've got some new stories in this relaunched website. Some have carried over from before, so there's some new ones. But I know, Mark, you're keen on gathering stories, and it'd be, I'm sure as we begin to tell more stories, that there will be some reaching the GodSend website to help others learn as well. So collecting more stories will be part of our aspirations for the future as well.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Well, guys, thank you for all of that. We shall move on to, we've got a couple of questions from the audience. So where should we go? That's first off, we just have Rito that says greetings. So hi, thanks for tuning in. Next, we'll go to Adam's question, which was, is there scope within GodSend for exploring language and metaphor? Interesting question. Any takers?
So I think if I understand the question right, I think that there isn't a chapter that says this is how you explore language and metaphor. But I think if you were to read some of the chapters and listen to some of the stories around the listening, for example, you would be thinking straight away, and around sharing Jesus, for example, you would be thinking straight away, how do I express this in a way that the folks I'm working with would respond to? And what little stories would we tell? What metaphors would work with them? One of the things, for example, in one of the approaches that we have to doing exploratory Bible study, for example, in Bible Talk, is we say, look, read a story that Jesus told or a story about Jesus, and then ask yourself the first question, which is, if this story happened today, what would it look like? Well, now straight away you're beginning to think about language, metaphor. What parable? The story of the sower that Jesus told. Well, what would that look like in the middle of Birmingham in 2023? So that does encourage you to think about metaphor and language and so forth.
Yeah, I think that hits the nail on the head. Adam's just sort of followed up with, he sort of meant when it comes to sharing stories of Jesus, and again, further in his context, they use a lot of classic car metaphors.
We've got Adam telling a story in the GodSend resource about classic cars, and maybe there's some work to do with Adam on this, because he talks about restoration, which is a wonderful Christian theme, but it's also a theme that, as he says, is there with classic cars as well. And Adam does a great job of connecting those two things. And I think, in a variety of ways, people are able to use the thing that they're passionate about. A friend of mine, not in a fresh expression context, but just was able to share her faith. She was someone who loved knitting, and she was able to introduce conversations about Jesus by saying, I love knitting, and I found that Jesus gives me a pattern for life. And I love that a way of connecting something that we're passionate about to Jesus. So
there are several other examples of that, and more broadly, one of the in the Sharing Jesus section, one of the ideas that we float is what we call conversations with a difference, where you encourage people to talk about something that they're really passionate about, whether it's a celebrity or sport or what's in the news or well-being or bullying at school or whatever. You encourage people to talk about that, and then you halfway through just say to them, now just imagine that a god or a guru dropped into this conversation, a spiritual guru dropped in. Imagine what would they say about the topic. And that encourages people to make connections between something that they thought had no connection to God, to make connections with God. So one group did this in America, and it was during lockdown, and they were a dog walking group, and they couldn't walk their dogs, and so they all met by Zoom. They presented their dogs to each other, by Zoom. They all waved their paws at each other, and they talked about pet care and so on. And then one of the person who convened the group then said, and tell me, folks, if God exists, what breed of dog would God have? And of course, they all laughed, and then they began to do that. And that's doing the sort of thing that Adam is doing with classic cars. It's getting people to make connections between spirituality and what they're passionate about in their lives, and to find language and so on that makes those connections. And that gets really exciting. It's really exciting for Christians, because they see all sorts of things they never saw before. But it's really exciting for people who don't necessarily have a Christian faith, because they see a connection between God and ordinary life that they thought was never possible.
And this is what I mean about earthiness. This is what it is. It's just real. So you connect and you respond to people naturally. There is really no barrier. You just have to be yourself. Be yourself.
I think that comment I pulled up there, Michelle Sims got that very clearly. That I've come to give you life on all four cylinders. I'm sure. Maybe Jesus will talk more about carburetors. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds like the Haynes manual version of John 10:10.
One of the other questions was from Mark, and he says, how much time commitment would you say a new Christian community would or should take?
Well, Mark, I want to reply by saying in this revised edition of GodSend, we do not answer that particular issue in a prescribed way by saying, it should be one session a week or 5 hours a month or anything like that, because it'll all vary from context to context. But we do address directly the question about what do you do when you're time starved. And in the third and fourth chapter, I think, of GodSend, we look at that, and we a number of things. We've sketched out a simple way that a team could meet, and you could pray together, and you could do some very simple Bible study in such a way that non-churchgoers could join you later on, and then you could do your planning. And we sketched out and said, look, you could do that in 3/4 of an hour or an hour, in quite a simple way. Obviously, it's going to vary from person to person and group to group. But then what we're saying is, look, if you spend an hour in that sort of worship and planning, you don't need to go to church on Sunday because you've been church that week. So if you met for planning, and maybe you eat together, maybe you do some planning together, you do some prayer, a little bit of Bible study together, and you have an evening together once a month, then that week you don't need to go to church because you've been church then. And what people don't realize, it came as quite a surprise to me when I was looking at Mark's account of the Last Supper. What happens is that they worship and they eat together, and then they walk out to the Mount of Olives. As they walk, Jesus says to them, by the way, folks, when I come back from the dead, we're going to meet again in Galilee. And what Jesus is doing some planning with them. And you know, if you integrate worship and eating and planning, you're doing exactly what Jesus did at the Last Supper. You have been to church on that occasion, so you don't have to go to church on Sunday that week. And I've said this to some groups the first time with fear and trepidation because there were several clergy in the audience, and I thought they're going to hate me for this because I'm going to be telling them, well, all that congregation don't show up next Sunday. And I was amazed at how warmly people responded to that because they could see the sense of it. So that's not the only thing, but that's one of the sort of little bits of wisdom that I've gleaned from other people, and we popped into GodSend and addresses, Mark, the sort of question you're feeling towards here.
And I think just the principles there, Mike, I think when we do things for people, that can take time. But actually, when you do things with people, when you're doing life and you're doing something that you're passionate about, that doesn't seem to be the sort of activity that seems to take time. I mean, relationships do take time, but I think the sense that if we're doing things with people and we're doing things that we enjoy and we're just bringing Christ into the midst of that, then that's very different to putting something on that takes a lot of preparation and planning and delivery.
Yeah.
So.
And we've also got, I love this, just near where I live in Oxford and near us in Whitney, there's a team that leads, I think it's an all-age activity once a week, and they've now got into the routine. So they do all their planning on WhatsApp, and they have a little spreadsheet. They meet on WhatsApp, they have a little spreadsheet, and they write down who's going to do what the next week when this little activity meets. And they did us a little video of their planning meeting. And this video, they did all that planning, and this video is 4 minutes, 20 seconds long. Mm-hmm. They did all that planning in just over 4 minutes. So, when it comes to the routine stuff, you don't have to take a lot of time over it. Just do it on WhatsApp, write down a little spreadsheet what you're going to do next, and you can do it really pretty quickly. And so it doesn't have to eat into your time in a mega way. And then, of course, you might meet periodically to do more longer term planning and more planning in depth and so on. So again, that's a resource. You can watch that video. It's on the website. I can't remember where, but you'll find it somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Guys, we're coming close to the end of our time. So I want to thank you guys for coming and joining me this evening. Thank you for posing those questions, guys. That's been really helpful. But a big thank you firstly to Nudrat. She's given a lot of time, possibly a little more time than she was expecting, in helping Mike and us record these conversations, and also naturally to Mike for all of your work, your wisdom, that amazing head of yours and all the knowledge that's in there and sharing some of that, and Simon for all the strategy and all of that. And I'll thank myself for just being great and doing all this stuff.
But no, it is worth saying, Mark, that's some of the visual stuff, although based on the animations you've taken with permission, the theme of the animations and made the website look wonderful. So I'll say thank you to you, Mark, for making GodSend.cloud, and we'll just keep saying the website address, GodSend.cloud, making that look really really good. So thanks.
Indeed. No, thank you, guys. That leads us on. So I'm going to say goodbye to Simon and Michael and Nudrat, Mike, who are going to go back off to the background. And I'm going to tell you guys about how do you access this stuff. So hopefully, if you've seen any of the other material, godsend.cloud, Simon has just been reiterating those words. So I'll say it again, godsend.cloud. I think, did they say it 6 times and you'll remember it? Godsend.cloud. That's where you can get access to all of this. It's all a very simple website, simply laid out, and should be easy, but easy ways to get in touch with us if you find it difficult in any way. In order to get the book, you can get that through the website as well. All over the website, there are several buttons that say buy the book. So click one of those buttons, it will bring you to where you can buy the book on Amazon. We also have bulk buy options. There's a little link underneath one of the buttons on the homepage, so that if you want to buy a bunch of books for your diocese, maybe you can do that and get them at a reduced cost. Also, you can get the book through the FX Resourcing website, which is fxresourcing.org. So hopefully that should be a ton of ways in which you can get to GodSend and get the book and all the stuff. But godsend.cloud is the main thing to remember for now. We would be missing the opportunity if we didn't just tell you about a couple of other things coming from Fresh Expressions over the next little while. At the end of this month, we have our gathering. We have gatherings twice a year, and it's a time for the movement to come together and just exchange stories, to really get together and help each other out and have those good times. Our theme for this gathering at the end of the month is leadership in the liminal. We're really exploring this time where we are post-COVID and trying to see where we can find those liminal spaces to do church, to do Christian communities, to introduce Jesus to people, what that looks like, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, all that good stuff. We've got Kate Coleman, Shamkar Man, Roy Searle, and Alan Roxburgh coming to share their wisdom with us. And you can find information and book tickets through our website. Go to freshexpressions.org.uk/gatherings. All the information is there. And secondly, we mentioned it before, we recently just launched a new podcast, which is called the Mission Shaped Podcast. And that is a bunch of conversations with myself and Beth Munn and a load of different FX practitioners. It's a one practitioner story every episode. And we just hear from their story, and then Beth and I sort of have a little chat about it at the end. But people are really, really enjoying it and having a good time with all that at the moment. You can find the podcast on the missionshapepodcast.com, which will bring you to the relevant pages on the Fresh Expressions website. Want to thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for giving your time up for this. We pray that you will have a wonderful time engaging with Jesus in this really amazing resource. And we pray and hope that you will have stories to come back to us with on how GodSend has affected your Christian community. Please do share those stories with us. For now, we'll sign off and say thank you for joining us again, and we'll see you next time. Bless you. Goodbye.